Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Kauf and I'm the Nerd on the Street, and today we are backing up our Nextcloud server. Alright everybody, this is going to be the last Nextcloud video for a little while. I was initially intending to make a Nextcloud installation video and an OnlyOffice video, which I've made both of those already. However, I had a viewer request in a comment on one of those videos that I show how to back up your Nextcloud server. This is going to be very quick and probably much shorter than those other two videos. Basically, there are only three things you need to worry about when you're backing up a Nextcloud server. You need your Nextcloud installation files, and if you look up the backup section of the Nextcloud manual, they actually talk about the config folder and the themes folder and individual things that are part of the installation files, but it's much easier to just grab the entire Nextcloud installation so that if you need to restore that backup, you've got everything there that you need to run the program. The second thing, as with any MySQL-based content management system, we need to back up our MySQL or MariaDB database, and I'll show you how to do that. And then third, since this is Nextcloud we're talking about, we do need to back up our data folder that contains all of our files. Your data folder might be inside of your Nextcloud installation folder as well if you just kept the default Nextcloud settings, but if you followed one of my tutorials, then your data folder will be somewhere else. And so if you have moved the data folder, you just want to make sure that you grab that too, since that's obviously where the most important data is. Those are the files you're keeping inside your cloud. The MySQL database isn't going to contain your files, but it will still contain important data, especially if you've installed a lot of apps. If you're using the Nextcloud Notes app, if you're using the Nextcloud Bookmarks app, there are a lot of Nextcloud apps that do keep all of their data within the MySQL database, or at least a large majority of it, so you do want to make sure to grab that database, and that's going to be the most complicated section here. So that's what we're doing. I'm going to show you how to back up your server. I'm going to simulate that server failing, and then we'll show you how to restore from your backup to a fully working installation again. So without further ado, we'll cut to the desktop. All right, guys, so here we are on the desktop. As you can see, I am currently logged into my Nextcloud instance. We've basically just got the default files, although we do have a test document that I created in my OnlyOffice video. We also have a slideshow presentation and a spreadsheet, and I've also gone ahead and uploaded just a short video clip to the server that we can use as test data. So we're going to make sure we back these files up. The server will fail, and then we'll restore them on another server. So we're going to back up our files first, and then we'll worry about the database last. We are going to connect to our server via SFTP. This is a file transfer protocol built on top of SSH. So if your server is running with SSH enabled and you're able to SSH into it, you will probably be able to connect to it with SFTP as well. I'm just going to connect in Dolphin here, but if you don't have Dolphin, if you're on, say, a Windows computer, you can use a program like FileZilla to connect. Just like if we're SSHing in, we'll specify what user we want to SSH in as, and that would be root for us. And then I'll type in the address example.nerdonthestreet.com. My system is asking me for my SSH passphrase here. After I enter that, we will be connected, and there's nothing in the /root folder on this server, but if I go up a level, you'll see we are now at the root of the file system on this server. So we'll grab the Nextcloud installation files first. Those are going to be under var www nextcloud, right where we put them in our setup video. You see if we expand out the HTML folder here, this is our default virtual host. So this is that Apache test page. If we take a look at index.html here, you can see it says Apache 2 Debian default page. So we don't want the HTML folder, we do want the Nextcloud folder. Now we've got a couple options here. We could just copy this folder and just paste it on our local system here, and that would transfer over all the files one by one that are inside of this Nextcloud folder. The only reason you might not want to do that is because if we do take a look at a terminal that's pulled up to the server right now, this is that same directory. I'm going to check if I have tree installed. I do not, so I'll go ahead and install it. And we're going to run tree on our Nextcloud directory, and then I'm going to pipe that into word count -L to tell us how many lines of output there are. And it took a second to run there, and we can see there are 21,539 files and directories within the Nextcloud folder. Many of those files and directories are very small, so it's not that it's a bandwidth issue, it's more the SFTP protocol and our client here, Dolphin. If we tried to copy this folder, and if you try and do this in FileZilla, you'll have the same issue. It's going to take a very long time for it to just go through programmatically and copy every single one of these individual files and directories one at a time, because it needs to initialize the transfer for every single one of those. So instead of doing that, we are going to compress the folder into a tarball. It's very similar to a .zip file on Windows. We're just going to wrap it up, and then we'll copy that instead. So it's going to have two advantages. One, we're only copying one large file, which is going to be quicker than copying many small files. And two, we also will get the benefit of at least a little bit of compression. So I'm going to specify tar, and our options are going to be C for create, Z for our compression. This is the tar.gz file that we're creating. V for verbose, and this is going to list the files and directories as it's compressing them. And F for file name, then we'll specify the file name. This is going to be Nextcloud. I'll call it serverfiles.tar.gz, and we want to compress the Nextcloud directory right here. So I will run that. You'll see it's going to go through. This will use some CPU on your server because it is compressing all of these files. All right, and it is finished there. So now if we come back and refresh our www directory, you'll see we've got a nextcloud-serverfiles.tar.gc file. So this file has been compressed with gzip. It is a little bit smaller than the Nextcloud directory would have been. And it's all one file, so we can easily copy it, and I will paste it right here in my Nextcloud backup folder that I've got on my local system. All right, so that's done copying. You can run a quick SHA-256 sum on it if you want to, just to confirm that nothing has changed. If we run that on the server, you can see that these checksums match, so the tar.gz file was transferred successfully. Next, we're going to do the same thing for our data folder. So our data folder, and by the way, you might want to, if you're doing this on a regular basis, delete the serverfiles.tar.gz file here, since it's obviously taking up space on your server, it's taking up storage space, and we're not actually using it for anything that is running Nextcloud. So we'll go ahead and do that actually. I'll delete it. We'll come back out to the root directory of our server, and in my tutorial video, I put our Nextcloud data inside of this NC data folder. And if we take a look inside of our NC data directory, you'll see here we've got our folder for our user, which the user I created was just called admin. If we go to our users section, the username was admin here. And that username corresponds to the name of the folder in this data directory, and we can look inside of admin and files here. This is where our actual files are stored. So if I come back out to the files on our Nextcloud server, like I said, I've got that MKV file. I've got a PowerPoint presentation and an Excel spreadsheet, since we were using OnlyOffice here. If we take a look inside of our file system, here's that MKV file, here's that PowerPoint file, the Excel file. So the files are stored right here. You see there's some app data directories inside of this data directory as well, and there's also a log file. So there's some other stuff within the data directory that we also want to keep. So just like we did with the Nextcloud install folder, we'll go ahead and we'll just make sure we're in the root of our web server, and we'll run that same tar-czvf nextcloud data.tar.gz, and we'll run that against nc data. So after running that, I will do the same thing. I'll copy that tar.gz file from the server to our client. All right, now run a SHA-256 sum on Nextcloud data. And the same thing over here. Okay, and that checksum matches as well, so we are all good on that front. Here in my example, since this is an example server and it is not actually being used, you can see that the server files were 100 megabytes or so, while the Nextcloud data folder was only about 20 megabytes. Normally, your data folder is going to be much larger than the Nextcloud install if you're actually keeping a decent amount of files in here. So that's something to keep in mind when you're planning out where you're going to store your backups. And finally, we need to back up our MariaDB or MySQL database. Now, if I had made this video a couple years ago, I would probably just show you how to do this using a tool called phpMyAdmin. It's a web-based GUI that you can use to manage your MySQL and MariaDB servers, and it does include backup and restore or export and import functionality within that web-based GUI. However, in this particular series, in this 2019 tutorial series, I have been showing you how to do things on the MariaDB command line, and we're going to do that with our database as well. So first things first, if I just run MariaDB and I get into MariaDB here, I'm going to use Nextcloud to switch to our Nextcloud database, and then I'm going to run show tables here, which should show us, yes, a list of the the tables in our database. So for example here, I mentioned that the Bookmarks app in Nextcloud stores its data inside of the MariaDB database. You can see here I've got the Bookmarks app installed. I was playing around with it, and I've actually got a decent number of bookmarks saved inside of here. On my production Nextcloud server, I'm actually switching over. I'm going to stop using my web browser's bookmarks, and I'm going to start using Nextcloud bookmarks instead, because I've got thousands of bookmarks, and it's getting difficult for any web browser to sync them between my different devices in a timely manner. So I'm switching to a server-centric solution that I control, which is the Bookmarks app. It's a nice app. It's got some limitations. I will probably make a separate video about the bookmark saga. But you can see this is where the actual data for this entire app is stored. That stuff is not stored in your data directory. It's just stored here in our database. So this isn't really a general MariaDB tutorial, so while we could look inside of any of these tables just to see what's going on, I'll just get to the point and I'll show you guys how to back it up. There's a tool called MySQL dump, and it's really handy because it lets us easily back up MySQL and MariaDB databases. The usage here is going to be -- databases. Our database is called Nextcloud. And MySQL dump can be used to back up and restore specific tables within the database, but we're not going to get into that in this video. We're just wanting to back up our entire server. So the Nextcloud database is going to be dumped, and if we just run this command right now, it's actually going to print out the entire database's contents to our terminal here. And we could actually just run that and copy and paste all of this into a text file, because if you take a look at what this tool is doing, it's pretty neat. It actually is creating MySQL commands to recreate the database. So it's not just saving the data within your database. If we go up and find the bookmarks table, here it is. So this file actually includes the MySQL commands to lock the OC bookmarks table for writing, and then it's going to insert into OC bookmarks values, and then here's all of my bookmarks that I've got, starting with the oldest ones that I had in my bookmarks when I started this migration project. So we could just copy and paste all of that, but it's going to be a little bit easier if we just redirect that output to a file. We're going to call it Nextcloud database.sql, and we will hit enter there. So now we've got a file called Nextcloud database. It is just a text file, but we can find it here if we refresh our folder. Here we've got Nextcloud database.sql. We'll copy and paste that. You can see it's very small, 402.7 kilobytes, and we can open it in kwrite, and we can see that it is just a text file containing MySQL commands, which is really cool. So that's everything that we need to do to back up this entire Nextcloud server. At this point, I'm going to pretend like something terrible happened to this server. Actually, why don't we make something terrible happen to this server? Let me SSH back in here, and we're going to run a joke command, classic joke command, rm-rf on our root directory, and I'll pass the no preserve root option in. So at this point, I'm deleting the root directory of this server. We are getting a lot of errors. Obviously, we can't delete virtual process files. Those aren't actual files on the file system, but looks like we are done here. ls command not found. Yeah, so we have deleted everything from our server. We've still got the commands built into bash, which includes help. Although I doubt we could even SSH back in here if we close the connection. Yeah, because first of all, the SSH server has been deleted. Second of all, I don't know if bash itself would still be on there if it was just loaded in memory when we ran that help command. The server is trashed at this point. That's what I'm getting at. And if we refresh our, yeah, interesting. So I've refreshed the page. We do still have Apache running, but we don't have enough information to actually get to anything. All right, so we're gonna come over to DigitalOcean, and we're just gonna pretend like that was a hard drive dying or something that was corrupting all of the files on our drive. So I'm gonna go to the destroy tab here, and we're going to rebuild this droplet, which basically means we're performing a clean install. I was using Debian for this series, so we will choose that. I will click rebuild, confirm. So DigitalOcean right now is going to wipe that SSD, that virtual SSD, and they're going to image Debian 10 onto it. All right, and that's completed. It was pretty quick since it was just an image. And we're going to SSH in here again. All right, and you can see my terminal is warning me, since we've re-imaged the machine, that the fingerprint for the server has changed. I'll go ahead and fix that. Known hosts. So we'll just delete that line there, save, and try and SSH in again. Yep, All right, so we are in our new server. If I do a systemctl status Apache 2, you can see we don't have Apache installed. And that's actually one thing I overlooked. Not Apache itself, but the configuration files for Apache. I did overlook that one, and also the SSH keys. So there are a couple things that we could have backed up that I didn't, but at least we've got Nextcloud. So let's just restore this real quick. We'll run a quick apt update. All packages are up to date already, so we'll go ahead and reinstall Apache, MySQL, PHP. All right, now go ahead and create our virtual host. Honestly, I've been using Apache for so long now, I just thought, oh, I don't need to back up the Apache file. I'll just create a new Apache configuration file, and it'll take me 2 seconds once we're on the new server. But obviously, if you do want to back up your Apache configuration, that stuff is stored in Etsy, Apache 2 sites available. So if we do an ls-al, I'm gonna copy our default file here to nextcloud.conf. And if you do want to back this up, then you just want to make sure you copy nextcloud.conf off of your server and onto your local client system or wherever you're backing up to. So I'm going to make a directory at var www nextcloud. I'm going to nano into nextcloud.conf. I'll set our server name to example.nerdonthestreet.com, server admin, and our document root to var www nextcloud. We'll save that stuff, we'll restart Apache 2, and if we refresh our page over here, site can't be reached. I forgot to enable the site. We'll do a2 in site Nextcloud. We'll reload Apache 2 again or restart it. Still refuse to connect. That is because our web browser still wants to go to this page via HTTPS. So you remember in my last video, I set up HSTS, that strict transport security. That told our web browser not to go back to HTTP ever. So we're not going to be able to access this page until we've got HTTP set up again. So we'll go ahead and set HTTP up again. And at this point, this is just a copy of my how to set up Nextcloud video, since we are going through the same preliminary steps before we get to Nextcloud itself. We're going to run certbot -- Apache again. And I'll also show you where the certbot files are stored in case you want to back those up too, because we are getting a new certificate right now, a new TLS certificate for HTTPS. But we didn't need to do that. If I had backed the certificate up, we could have just kept using it. So at this point, you can see the page has reloaded. We are able to access it. It's still blank, it's empty, but example.nerdonthestreet.com is back up. And if you do want to back up your HTTPS public and private encryption keys or certificates, this right here is where they are stored in Etsy Let's Encrypt Live, and then the name of the site. So if we go to Etsy Let's Encrypt Live and we do an ls-al, you can see this entire live directory. If you want to be able to get back up under your feet as quickly as possible and not have to regenerate keys like I just did, you can put this live folder into a tarball and back it up as well. So now that that's done, there's a couple more things I want to do before we actually restore Nextcloud. I am going to nano into my Etsy Apache 2 sites enabled nextcloud-le-ssl.conf file. And by the way, sites enabled is just going to link these files back to the sites available directory, so it doesn't matter which one you access particularly. I'm going to paste in our options here that we know we'll want in our Apache configuration files. So our headers configuration, our config to allow HT access. We'll go ahead and reload Apache 2. The difference, by the way, between systemctl reload and restart is that reload will tell Apache to reread its configuration files, but it won't actually stop the process, whereas restart actually stops and then starts Apache over again, which will also reload the config files, but it does take just a tiny bit longer. All right, there's one more package I know we'll need. That's our memory caching package. I'm going to make sure that we set our PHP configuration. Remember, we upped our maximum memory limit to 512 megabytes in my setup video. So if you want to back this up, this is where this file is, Etsy PHP 7.3 Apache 2 php.ini. And you can see why I normally don't back all of this stuff up. Normally what I back up is what's in var www. I back up my databases. So those two things apply to all my websites. And then for Nextcloud, we've also got the data directory. Those are the three main points that are actually difficult to recreate. All of this stuff I'm doing in a matter of minutes. If you're an enterprise, this would be too slow, but for me, it's fine. We'll just enable a couple headers here, restart Apache again. And then the last thing we'll do is we'll run that MySQL secure installation script again. So we'll go ahead and reinitialize MySQL, or initialize it for the first time. And now, without further ado, we are ready to restore Nextcloud. I'm going to cd into var www nextcloud, and I am going to copy my Nextcloud server files tarball right here. Once that file is copied over, we can go ahead and run tar xvf on Nextcloud server files to extract it, just like we did to install Nextcloud in the first place. And just like the first time, that is going to place a Nextcloud directory inside of our Nextcloud directory. So we'll remove our server files tarball, and we are going to move everything within the Nextcloud folder to the current folder. There are a couple of dot files within the Nextcloud directory, and in order to make those get moved at the same time as everything else, I'm going to run shopt, which I assume stands for shell option, and we are going to set the option .glob. This is going to include dot files when we're globbing with the wildcard. So now when we move everything within Nextcloud to the current directory, we will just be able to remove the directory Nextcloud, and you can see that our .htaccess file, for instance, was moved to the current directory properly. We do want to make sure that our permissions are set correctly. You can see since www.data was the user that owned these files before, a tarball is going to keep your Unix file permissions intact, but we do still need to set the current directory to also be owned by that user. So we'll do chown www.data, www.data, and we'll run that on the current directory. No need for recursive since, like I said, the contents are already owned correctly. But depending on the number of users on your system and the complexity of the system, you may need to also set the permissions on the rest of the files as well. So that's one thing to double check. If we refresh now, we'll see we do get an internal server error, most likely because our MariaDB database is just completely missing right now. So in order to restore that, like I said, we could just go into MariaDB right now. We can open up our .sql file, and I could just copy all of this, if I load it properly, copy all of this, and just paste it right in here. And it would run through basically a script, and it would put all of our data back in to our MySQL database. However, even though we could do that, it's not very graceful. It will take a second, actually. It takes a surprising amount of time for all of that text to get copy and pasted into our SSH session. It does take just as long as uploading a file of this size, or maybe even longer because it's going one character at a time. So what we'll do instead is we will go ahead and create our user and database just like we did when we set the server up in the first place. So we'll create our database, Nextcloud, we'll create our user, and we'll set our password here. Make sure that the database is called the same thing as it was the first time. That'll just make things easier. We will give our user all permissions for that database, and we will quit out of the MariaDB shell. We will go ahead and copy the .sql file from our client to the root directory of our server. Actually, let's use the /root directory, the home folder for our root user. So now if we just type cd and do an ls, here is our Nextcloud database.sql file. The syntax to restore this is going to be MySQL. We can optionally specify our user here if we wanted to make sure that this was being inserted by the Nextcloud user, but I'm just going to specify -p for the database. Database is called Nextcloud, and we are going to pipe in the Nextcloud database.sql file. So this backwards redirect, it's not used super often in Bash, at least I don't use it super often, but this is the kind of situation we would use it in. We could have catted out Nextcloud database.sql and piped it into MySQL maybe, but this way looks nicer. We're running MySQL, and our input, instead of asking us to type input, it's going to use this file as the standard input. So we'll run that. Since I'm logged in as root here, I can just press enter without entering a password. If you're not logged in as root, then you might want to use that -u option to specify your Nextcloud username. Now the server's still not going to work because our data directory is still missing, and that does include some things that Nextcloud wants in order to work properly. So our last step here is we will go ahead and upload into the actual root directory of our server the Nextcloud data.tar.gz file. And once that's copied over, we'll go into our terminal. We will move to the root directory. We can see our tarball right here. So we'll run tar xvf on nextcloud.data or nextcloud-data. And if we do an ls-al now, we can see that we do have our nc data directory. It is owned properly already, so we can remove that tarball, Nextcloud-data, and we can try refreshing our server, and you can see it comes back up. And we are able to access our files, for instance, this test video that I had. Now, OnlyOffice was a separate application, so that's a little bit different. We don't have OnlyOffice installed. And honestly, if you need everything to be backed up, then maybe a snapshot of the entire server is what you're looking for, more than individual applications. But in terms of just backing up your Nextcloud install, we do have all these files here. We can download them. and open them up locally, as you can see. Boy, I didn't do much with that presentation. And so that is what it takes to back up and restore your Nextcloud server. This video ran longer than I thought it would because there are more components than you would think about at first when it comes to actually restoring the system and making it usable. But hopefully this was helpful for you if you're considering setting up your own server and you want to make sure you have a good backup solution. Really, this seemed like a lot of steps, but as long as you've got the backup process automated, you just want to make sure you tick all the boxes and get all the pieces of information you need backed up. That way, when it comes time to restore, it's okay if you have to look up how to set up your Nextcloud server again when you have to restore the server. As long as you've got the data there and you haven't lost anything, that's what's really important. So if this video was helpful to you guys, or you think it might be helpful to others, please consider going to nerdclub.knots.co and joining the Nerd Club for just $3 a month. If you want me to manage your Nextcloud server for you so that you don't have to, go to managedby.knots.co and submit a project. But for now, that's everything I had to show you guys. So I'm Jacob Kaufman, I'm the Nerd on the Street, and I'll see you all later. Bye.